Do you want to spend less time starting seeds in your plant nursery so you have more time to watch all my other YouTube videos? In this video, I go over 5 time-saving tips to help you start your vegetable seeds more efficiently. Welcome to Small Farm Efficiency, where I track and analyze data on my 1/8 acre market garden and share my findings of the most efficient ways to grow and sell vegetables from small-scale farms. For each of these tips I'm about to give you guys for being more efficient starting seeds in your plant nursery, I'm going to time myself planting seeds with and without that tip, and then I'll share with you guys my results so you can see how much time you can possibly save while starting seeds this year. Okay guys, so my first tip is to pre-water your soil. That way, once you pot up all your seedlings, you don't have to water them all individually, and you also don't have to worry about making a mess with the water and with the soil getting all over the place. And it's also a lot easier to figure out how much soil you need in each pot or each plug tray, because sometimes when you put in the dry soil then you water it, it really compacts down, whereas if you're putting in pre-watered soil, the soil will already be pretty compact, so you're not, filling up an entire pot or plug tray and then only to realize that you need twice as much soil. So here's a few things I've got with me. A few bags of potting mix over here, and then I have this, I think it's a 27-gallon tote that I just use to hold the soil, and then just some sort of stick, anything will do just to stir it up, and then I just have this 5-gallon bucket full of some water. So I'm going to dump a couple bags of potting mix into the tote, put a bit of water in there, and stir it up. Alright, now before I go to dump the water in, you don't just want to dump a whole 5-gallon bucket. You kind of want to gauge based on how moist you want your soil to be, how much you want in there. So one nice way to test it is if you grab a handful of the soil and squeeze it, if it's just dripping water out, you probably watered it too much, you want to add a little more soil. If no water comes out at all, you probably need a little bit more water. You want just a little bit of water to come out when you squeeze a handful. So here we go. Man, I love that smell of the soil. So here we go. Grab a handful and squeeze it. You can see there's not a ton of water coming off there, but I can also tell that it's pretty nice and wet. So that's just what you want. Okay, so my second tip for you guys is batching together tasks. This is a good thing to do just in general if you're trying to be more efficient, but it's especially relevant here. So as you can see here, I've got 3 separate 10-20 trays filled with these 3.5-inch nursery pots, and I'm going to be filling up all 3 of them at the same time. I put them nice and close together, that way I'm not wasting any soil, and that's just going to be way better than doing them one at a time. I'm not going to have to be as precise. I can just kind of let the soil go where it goes and then fill in the gaps as I need. The second part of this is once I've filled them all, I can put the little holes in where I need with my fingers all at the same time, and then do all the seeding at the same time. So I'm not going from filling the pots with soil, pressing a hole, putting a seed in, then going to get more soil for the next pot. It's just all the same tasks all at the same time. So here we go. I'm going to grab another 5-gallon bucket. Scoot this back so you guys can see. I'm going to grab a 5-gallon bucket, scoop the soil that I've already pre-watered, and then just dump a few bucket loads on top and then spread it out with my hands, get it nice and even into the pots. Okay, so now that we have a bunch of soil on top here, just make sure these are nice and close together, spread it out and let it evenly go through into all the pots. Alright, so one piece of advice here, once you've got it all nice and even, spread these apart a bit, and there's going to be a little bit of soil that fell through the cracks. You can just scoop that up and throw it back into your big container of soil. So now another thing that I find to be really useful is instead of pressing down on each of these to make sure the soil is compact, if you just pick them up and drop them down a couple times. That'll let all the soil settle. You're gonna have a nice even amount of soil where the seed, once the seed goes in. A nice even contact with the seed, I should say. These are looking good. I'll put them all back together. Now, today we're planting tomatoes. So the tomato seeds only need to go about 1/4 of an inch deep. So that's not very deep. So what I like to do here is spread out my hands like this, my index finger and my pinky finger, and they line up pretty perfectly with the centers of the pots. So I'll just go up, down, and you can pretty quickly just get a little hole in each one. Okay guys, so that's so much faster than putting a hole in as you plant the seed and then covering it. So much faster to do it all at the same time. All right. So let me show you guys what we got. We're planting some Sun Gold cherry tomatoes. I got these from Johnny's. I've been happy with the seeds from Johnny's in the past. Alright, so I usually like to pour them out into my hand, into one hand, and then with the other hand just grab a seed and put it in each hole. Alright, there we go. We got all the seeds in. So I'm just going to put the leftovers back in their packet. Alright, now the next step, just cover up all those holes nice and gently. Just make sure they're all covered a little bit. It goes really quick when you're doing the same thing for all of them once again. So another way to take advantage of batching your tasks together. Okay, so my next tip for you guys is to label your seed starts in bulk. So in these trays, they're all the same plants. So all I need to do is label it once and put them on the same shelf, and I'm done. The way I organize my seed starting stations, every single shelf, I make sure it's all the same thing because I'm growing a ton of every variety anyway. So that way I'm not wasting tons of extra time labeling. I'm not trying to remember, oh, what did I put there? What was in this row? I've seen a lot of people will do each row is a different variety or a different thing. And that's great at a small scale. You can try lots of different stuff. But when you're growing this many plants, you don't want to be wasting time writing that many labels. So grab a label. I just like to put what's in it and the date. Alright, just put this in one of them. They'll all be on the same shelf. So we're good to go. My fifth and final tip for you guys is to use the right supplies. Now, there's definitely nothing wrong with using styrofoam cups or just using what you have around to start some seeds. But if you are trying to do this at a larger scale and grow a massive amount of things, it's going to be such a time saver to get the right things. I love growing in these 10-20 trays with the plugs just because of how easy it is to do this. In the past, I've grown in styrofoam cups. Another thing is little pots like these, but with these, they're circular. They don't fit super nicely in the trays. There's gaps in them, so you can't just dump all of your soil on and spread it out and be good to go. With these, sometimes I'll scoop the soil one at a time and just planting. This is 54 plants right here that I just did pretty quickly. Scooping 54 times in the soil, compacting it, making sure it's full, planting it, just that, those extra movements are going to add up and take you a ton of extra time. So I definitely recommend, if you're growing at any kind of large scale relative to the size of the space you're growing in, I think it really makes sense to just invest in some high quality nursery supplies so that you can get the job done much faster. So now I'll be seeding a single 10-20 tray without using any of the tasks that we've talked about. I won't be pre-watering the soil, I won't be batching my tasks together. I'm going to be putting a single label in this tray instead of one label for 3 trays, and I won't be dropping the tray to let the soil settle. I'll be doing it all by hand, and I'm going to time myself doing this so that we can compare the difference in how long this takes versus how long it takes using all my tips. Alright, so here we go. Now, watering dry soil like this actually takes quite a while because when you initially put the water into the soil, it's not going to absorb right away. So you always have to wait a little bit, let it absorb initially, and then you have to water it another time. Another thing to mention here is it's just a lot more messy. I'm getting water all over the place. There's wet soil all over my table. It's going to be a lot harder to clean up than it is using all the tips that I talked about. Alright, and there we have it. One tray seeded, not using any of the tips from this video. So I'll be right back to talk about how long this took compared to how long it took seeding trays using the tips from this video. Okay, so before we jump in to the timings and how much faster I was using all my tips versus just doing a single tray with none of the tips, let's do a quick review of the 5 tips in this video. The first is to pre-water your soil. That just helps save so much time because you're not hand watering each individual pot, and you're also not waiting for the water to absorb into the soil. The second tip is to batch your processes as much as you can. You don't want to be poking a hole in the soil, grabbing a seed, placing it in the hole, covering the hole, and then moving on to the next pot. You'd rather poke all your holes at once, seed them all at once, and then cover them all at once. You're just going to be way faster and way more efficient doing the same thing over and over than you are switching tasks every time you're going to do something. The third tip is to drop your trays a couple of times. That just lets the soil settle. It's going to get you good contact between the seed and the soil, and you're not going to be wasting your time refilling any of the trays that lose soil when you water them and it gets more compressed. You're going to notice that right away. It's going to be easy to take care of. The fourth tip is to label your trays in bulk. So instead of doing individual rows of seeds and labeling them all differently, or just doing a single tray and labeling it, I like to label at least 3 trays with a single label and put them all next to each other. That way I'm not spending lots of time writing the labels, writing what's in the tray and the date that I seeded them. I can just write it once for multiple trays and be done with it. And the final step is to just use the right supplies. And guys, just do what makes sense for your context. If you're growing a few tomatoes or a few cucumbers or whatever you want to be growing in your garden or on your farm, it makes sense, it's fine to just use individual pots. But if you're doing anything at a scale like this, where you're just growing a whole ton of the same variety, the same plants, it really makes sense to use something like this. It's going to save you a ton of time and a ton of headache. Alright, so now let's get into the timings. When I time myself seeding the single tray without any of the tips from this video, it took just a couple seconds longer than 6 minutes. Now that might not sound like a super long time, especially for trays that are full of 18 plants, but as you can see, if you're seeding all of these units full of seeds, 6 minutes for each individual tray is going to take quite a while. Okay, so now we're going to add up some individual components from my seed starting tips and how long it took to do each of those, and we'll see how much better that was than just doing an individual tray without the tips. So first of all, to do the pre-watering, that took me 3 minutes and 26 seconds total. Now, that's a decent amount of time, but I've been experimenting and I know that the amount of soil I had in there with that watering can fill about 9 total 10-20 trays. So when you're looking at a per tray basis, it actually didn't take that long. Per tray, the pre-watering of the soil and mixing only took 23 seconds per 10-20 tray. That's like nothing. Okay, so now the next thing I want to talk about is the tray prep seeding, labeling, all of that put together. So added up, for the 3 trays I had on the table at the same time, in total, that took 6 minutes and 26 seconds. When you divide that by 3 down to a per tray basis, that was taking me 2 minutes and 9 seconds per tray. So now when we add everything together, the soil prep plus the tray prep and seeding and labeling and everything, the total amount of time it took per tray was only around 2.5 minutes, guys. So we improved from without the tips, doing a single tray at a time, to using the tips in this video, went from 6 minutes per tray down to 2 minutes and 30 seconds per tray. That's an amazing difference. Okay, so just for some context here, behind me I have these shelving units that I love to start my seeds in, and in these I have room for these 3.5-inch nursery pots in 10-20 trays. I have room for 864 of those. So behind me, I'm going to be starting 864 tomatoes, peppers, cucumbers, larger fruiting vegetables like that. So using my methods, seeding 3 trays at the same time with all the tips in this video, that's a total of 48 trays, and each of them taking 2.5 minutes per tray. The total time to start 864 plants is exactly 2 hours. So 120 minutes to start all those seedlings is almost no time when you're talking about the amount of time spent in the nursery. After these are seeded, since I don't pot them up, I leave them in these till they go out in the ground, because I start out using 3.5-inch nursery pots, which is plenty of space for those seeds to stay in there and the plants to grow for 8 weeks before I transplant them out into the yard. So the only thing I have to do once they're seeded here is just come down, make sure the soil is still moist. I can be bottom watering them until they germinate. Sometimes I'll spray the top of the soil if it's getting a little bit dry. And then I have the lights on a timer, so it's really pretty hands off from here, and 2 hours is not a ton of time to spend to get over 800 plants. So right behind me is what will become 54 sun gold tomato plants that we just seeded together. If you guys are interested in a grow station setup like this, please click the link right over here, and I have an in-depth guide on why I think this grow station is extremely efficient. And if you'd like to build one, you can follow along the steps for a nice easy time. I can build it in under 30 minutes, so it's not a big time sink, and it also holds trays very efficiently and is very cost efficient as well. If you want to learn more ways to efficiently grow and sell vegetables on a small scale farm, consider subscribing to my channel for more videos like this. Bye everybody.